On the 28th of February 1948, the British colony of the Gold Coast was thrust into an unprecedented crisis. A group of ex-servicemen who fought for Britain in the Second World War took to the streets to express their grievance over negotiations and unpaid benefits that the administration had promised them. The protest was soon hijacked by an angry mob and soon degenerated into chaos. They started out as a peaceful attempt to bring a petition to the Governor General of the Gold Coast administration. As the group marched toward the governor's residence at Christiansborg Castle, they were stopped and confronted by a group of armed colonial policemen led by Superintendent Colin Imre, who refused to let them pass. Superintendent Imre ordered the ex-servicemen to stop, but they continued to advance. Seeing that his command was disregarded, he ordered a police officer to fire the protesters, but the officer shot in the air. Frustrated and scared that the protesters might overwhelm them, Imre grabbed the gun out of one of the policemen and fired straight at the servicemen, killing 3 former soldiers. With the bodies of the 3 of their comrades lying in cold blood, the ex-servicemen turned back and headed straight to the center of Accra. Now, early in January, the guard chief, Kwame Boni III, known in private life as Theodore Taylor, had organized a boycott of all European imports in response to their inflated prices, and there were already demonstrations happening in the street. The day the boycott was scheduled to end, 28 February, coincided with the march by the ex-servicemen. Before the ex-servicemen reached the heart of Accra, news had gotten out already that the colonial police were shooting at unarmed protesters at Christiansborg Castle. By the time these veterans of the World War II arrived at the heart of Accra, they were met by an angry mob, and what started out as peaceful demonstration soon turned out to be a full-scale riot. The angry mob set cars ablaze, looted stores owned by foreigners, moved against prisons, broke down the prison doors, and set prisoners free. Within days, the riot had spread in towns throughout the colony, leaving 29 people dead and over 200 people injured. The local political leadership in Ghana, known as the United Gold Coast Convention (UGCC), responded by sending a telegram to the Secretary of State in London saying, "Unless the colonial government is changed and a new government of the people and their chiefs installed at the center immediately, the conduct of masses now completely out of control with strikes threatening in police quarters and rank and file, police indifferent to the orders of officers will continue and result in worse violent and irresponsible acts by uncontrolled people." The UGCC blamed the Governor General, Sir Gerald Creasy, referring to him as Crazy, and further stated that the Working Committee United Gold Coast Convention declares they are prepared and ready to take over the interim government. "We ask in the name of the oppressed, inarticulate, misrule and misgoverned people and their chiefs that the special commissioner be sent out immediately to hand over government to the interim government of the chief and people to witness immediate calling of the Constituent Assembly." In response to this, the governor declared a state of emergency, promulgated the Riot Act, and had the leadership of the UGCC, popularly referred to as the Big Six, across Ghana, arrested and sent to jail. They were Ebenezer Ako Adje, Edward Akufo-Addo, J.B. Dankwa, Emmanuel Obetsebi Lampe, William Ofori-Atta, and Kwame Nkrumah. This event marked the beginning of Ghana's journey towards independence and set the ground for the African Revolution. It was led by the mercurial, energetic, passionate, and unforgettable Kwame Nkrumah. Now, if you name one person who played the most pivotal role in the liberation of Africa, Kwame Nkrumah will undoubtedly be one of the most influential figures to be named. This man played such an important role in the liberation of Ghana that he was called the founding father of Ghana. In fact, he was such a threat to the British colonial authority that Governor Aden Clark called him our local Hitler. Nkrumah faced imprisonment due to the strikes and boycotts he organized, leading to a 3-year prison sentence to be served at Fort James Prison in Accra, Ghana. He was crucial in establishing Ghana's present-day system of government, including its political structure and constitution, which remain a cornerstone in modern Ghana. He was a very influential Pan-Africanist who spent his life pursuing the freedom and unification of all African countries into one United States of Africa, and was one of the pioneers and founding member of the Organization of African Unity. For Nkrumah, Ghana was willing to delay its independence so that other African colonies will attain independence at the same time. He quickly became the symbol of hope for the African continent liberation struggle, but as soon as he got hold of power, as if to prove that Africa was not ready to rule itself, he quickly became authoritarian. The country he started as a democracy soon took the face of an individual enterprise. He declared all political parties illegal, revised the constitution to give him the power to detain without trial, and declared himself president for life. This man was the hope of Ghanaians. They called him the deliverer and the emancipator. But how could a man who had done so much for the freedom of his people turn back to be the same man who wanted to cage them? What were his intentions? Was he trying to consolidate power around himself because of greed, or was he trying to be a benevolent dictator? In this episode of Afrinometry, we will examine the life of one of Africa's most formidable forces, His Excellency, the Honorable Osagefo Dr. Kwame Nkrumah.
Our enemies are many, and they stand ready to pounce upon and exploit our every weakness. They play upon our vanities and flatter us in every kind of way. They tell us that this particular person or that particular country has greater or more favorable potentialities than the other. They do not tell us that we should unite, that we are all as good as we are able to make ourselves once we are free.
Kwame was born in Krofo in the southwestern region of the Gold Coast. Although his mother said he was born on 21st September 1912, Kwame insists that he was born 3 years earlier, making his birth date 21st September 1909. At his birth, his parents named him Francis Nwea Kofi Nkrumah. His father, Opanin Kofi Nwina Nguloma, was a goldsmith and was not always present because he was away in a nearby town called Half Assini, where he pursued his goldsmith business. So Nkrumah was raised by his mother, Elizabeth, and his extended family, who lived together in the traditional African way. Although he was not always present, Nkrumah's father was a respected member of the community, and his counsel was often sought on very important matters of their traditional and domestic affairs. As a child, Nkrumah was full of energy and high spirit. He often lured his friends to the surrounding bushes and nearby sea to play. He carried this energy with him even throughout his adult life, as expressed by his love of sport. As president of Ghana, he organized a football match between the Black Stars of Ghana and Real Madrid in 1962. He was so enthusiastic and happy with the performance of the Black Stars of Ghana in the match, which ended 3-3. Nkrumah started his elementary school in Half Assini, a Catholic mission school. He was a student teacher and among the brightest students in the school. Another remarkable feat he achieved was completing a 10-year elementary program in 8 years. By 1925, he was baptized into the Catholic faith. Nkrumah then proceeded to be trained as a teacher at the Government Training College, which was later named Achimota School. At Achimota College, the principal, Father Alec Garden Fraser, and his deputy, Kwegir Agre, exposed him to the ideas of Marcus Garvey and W.E.B. Du Bois. His school teachers thought that there should be cooperation between races to smoothing governance on the Gold Coast. But Nkrumah, through the ideas of Garvey, soon believed that only when the black man governs himself will there be any harmony between the races. These ideas of black nationalism solidified in Nkrumah when he came into close contact with Nnamdi Azikiwe, a journalist and future president of Nigeria. Azikiwe advised him to further his education, and he applied to study at London University. Although he failed the entrance examination, his relatives gathered money to support him in pursuing a graduate degree in the United States. In October 1935, Nkrumah arrived in the United States to pursue his education at Lincoln University. Nkrumah is now in the front of his big dream, but there was one challenge. He didn't have the complete money for his semester's fee. He enrolled anyway, and soon won a scholarship that covered his tuition at the university. But there was still another challenge. He had traveled with limited money and needed to find a way to sustain himself throughout his study period. To tackle this problem, Nkrumah did menial jobs such as wholesale fish seller, poultry attendant, cleaner, and dishwasher. All of this sustained him throughout his studies. While in the US, Nkrumah was exposed to the Black nationalist movement, which shaped how he thought about Africans. He spent summers in Harlem, where he listened and sometimes participated in street debates about Africa and Africans. He later stated that these evenings in Harlem were very important in shaping his thoughts about the African continent. With these ideas, Nkrumah became an activist student. He mobilized a group of African students to form Africa Student Association to help facilitate the independence of each African colony individually. Although Nkrumah urged a Pan-African strategy even at this point. After he had completed his first degree, Lincoln University employed him as an assistant lecturer, and he stayed there for a while, teaching. At Lincoln, he was committed to Pan-Africanism and even played a major role in the organization of Pan-Africanist conference that happened in New York City in 1944, which urged the United States to help African colonies gain independence after the Second World War. Nkrumah pursued his master's degree in the US and even added a degree in theology, after which he left for London to pursue his PhD. In 1945, he chose to be referred as Kwame Nkrumah, dropping his baptism name to sound more African. The same year, he started a PhD at London School of Economics, but withdrew after only one term. He enrolled in 2 other schools, but still could not complete studies with them. By this time, he was increasingly becoming very busy with political activities. He was even among the chief organizers and treasurer of the 5th Pan-African Conference, which took place in Manchester and laid out the plan for Africa's independence with the aim of pursuing the Federal United States of Africa. After 12 years of being away from the colony, Nkrumah was invited to become the secretary of the UGCC. The UGCC was the first political party in the Gold Coast. The leadership of the party together with Nkrumah were known as the Big Six. This was the same group who responded to Accra riots by sending a telegram to the Secretary of State demanding for the right to self-governance. The UGCC was formed after the 1946 Gold Coast Constitution gave the Africans the majority in the Legislative Council for the first time. Not long after the party was formed in 1947, the Big Six were charged for inciting the 1948 boycotts and Accra riots, and they were sent to jail. All thanks to Nkrumah, who was an ardent advocate for independence now, instead of the delayed approach that the UGCC leadership wanted. Nkrumah's energy and determination for immediate self-governance was always in loggerheads with the other leaders of the UGCC, who adopted the self-governance at the shortest possible approach. For Nkrumah, this was too slow. The beginning of their problem started when members of the Big Six, with the exception of Kwame Nkrumah, were appointed to the Kausi Commission to draft out a new constitution for the Gold Coast. Prior to the Kausi Commission, the British government set up another committee to investigate the events of February 1948 that led into the Accra riots. This committee highlighted the inadequacies of governorcracy and recommended that another commission be set up to draft a new constitution. Remember, the Big Six were jailed for inciting the 1948 Accra riots, right? Good. Now, even the Big Six blamed Nkrumah for inciting the riots. Nkrumah was faced with a new challenge. He was in disagreement with the Big Six about the approach to self-governance, and the colonial administration did not trust him. The Big Six also felt that Nkrumah does not respect the code of conduct of the party and therefore demoted him to the rank of treasurer to reduce his influence in the party. Nkrumah's response to this proved to be one of the most important decisions in his life, not just his life, for Ghana and the whole continent of Africa. He first created his own newspaper known as the Accra Evening News, which was devoted to sharing struggles against imperialism and to advocate for freedom. Then in July of 1949, Kwame Nkrumah resigned from the UGCC and announced to the amusement of a huge crowd in Ghana the formation of a new party, which was called the Convention People's Party, CPP. He aligned the struggle of independence from 1947 and the party's plan to pursue independence now. The UGCC had a youth wing called the Committee on Youth Organization, CYO. By now, the CIO was pro-Nkrumah and had already adopted the slogan of self-governance now. So when Nkrumah created the CPP, he had a large following from his erstwhile youth organization of the UGCC, which has since become independent of its parent organization. The CPP approach was radical, forward-looking and aggressive. This approach soon gave them popularity across the entire Gold Coast, with the party's red, white and green colors soon in almost every town and village. The arrival of the CPP coincided with the arrival of a new governor to the Gold Coast, Charles Haddon Clark. The British government was concerned about the rising crisis in the Gold Coast and decided to sign Haddon Clark to tame the situation and bring order to the colony. Unfortunately for Haddon Clark, Nkrumah was already a man of the people. They may not have independence yet, but Nkrumah was a people's president. Within weeks of the governor's arrival, Nkrumah called for the Kosi constitution to be rewritten. He believed that the constitution fell short of dominion status, and he knew that the governor will never agree to his demand for a review. But that was what he wanted anyway. He needed a reason to declare the positive action which he had been mobilizing for since the announcement of the party. So after following due process and giving the governor time to respond, but did not receive any, on 8 January 1950, Nkrumah announced the call for positive action. The positive action was a model which adopted by the CPP and inspired by Mahatma Gandhi, and it involved a series of political protests, union strike, and boycott of foreign goods. Unfortunately for Nkrumah, the positive action quickly led into violence, which led to the death of 2 policemen. Seeing this, the governor arrested Nkrumah and other leaders of the CPP. He was charged with inciting the people government. He was found guilty on each count and was sentenced to 1 year imprisonment for each charge. While in prison, he was charged again for sedition in connection with a newspaper article published in his newspaper. He was found guilty and sentenced to another 1 year in prison. In addition to his sentence, the evening news was banned. He was then taken to James Ford Prison, where he would serve his 3 one-year sentences consecutively. At James Ford Prison, Nkrumah was united with 10 other CPP leaders, and coincidentally, the beginning of his sentence coincided with the end of the sentence of Kwame Nkrumah, his assistant, who had just finished a 6-month sentence for publishing false information on the evening news. The colonial government may have assumed that with Nkrumah in prison, the CPP would cripple and will not be able to compete with the UGCC, which was their favorite in the next election. But the release of Bedema became the very thing that the CPP needed. Nkrumah communicated with Bedema through smuggled notes on toilet papers about the campaign strategies and progress. Nkrumah insisted that the CPP contest all positions and also had his name on the ballot for a position in Accra. This was possible because they had found a loophole in the constitution that made a prisoner eligible to be elected or elect if his prison sentence does not exceed 1 year. Although Nkrumah was to serve 3 years in prison, he had 3 sentences, each not exceeding a year. In February 1951, the first general election under the universal suffrage to be held in the colonial Africa took place in the Gold Coast. The CPP emerged victorious in a landslide victory, winning 34 of the 38 legislative seats contested. The UGCC won only 3 seats, and the other one was taken by an independent. Nkrumah won the Accra constituency, and that began the dilemma for Governor Haddon Clark. You see, it would have been an easy thing if Nkrumah was serving a single 1-year sentence. But unfortunately, that was not the case. He was serving 3, and he still had 2 more to serve. Well, that was none of the concern of the people. As soon as the crowd heard of his victory, they went hysterical. They took to the street dancing and celebrating, and the next day, thousands of supporters assembled in front of James Ford Prison awaiting the release of Nkrumah. Now, when Bedema was released from prison, he invented a term he called prison graduate. The prison graduate was a term used to describe the politicians and activists who had served a prison term. On the day of the release of any prisoner, the other prison graduates would gather with white garments and hats at the gates of the prison to receive the prisoner. So when the crowds gathered in front of James Ford Prison, all of the women and men were adorned in the prison graduate attire. But the problem is, Nkrumah had not completed his prison terms. He had barely even completed 1. The governor was left to decide between releasing Nkrumah then or risk a chaos which may exceed the one experienced during the Accra riot. Another challenge was he did not have enough police to tame the crisis if it started. Left with only one option, Governor Haddon Clark announcing what he termed an act of grace that Nkrumah would be released at 1 p.m. on Monday the 12th of February 1951. Nkrumah was released to rapturous celebration of the awaiting prison graduates, and on the following day, Governor Aden Clark summoned Nkrumah and asked him to form a government. By now, the governor had analyzed the situation and had concluded that the best way to govern these people was to cooperate with their leaders. Upon election, Nkrumah's title was head of government, but changes were soon made, and in 1952, the governor withdrew from the cabinet, leaving Nkrumah as prime minister. He used his position as prime minister to continue pursuing reforms that would lead to independence. Another election was announced in 1954. The previous election was just to establish a government, but as agreed between the cabinet and the British government, independence would follow after the 1954 election. The CPP continued to campaign, telling the people to elect them to finish the job. The polls, they won over 2/3 of the election, and for the first time in colonial Africa, the cabinet was completely in control of Africans. Independence was in sight. As soon as the cabinet became purely African, a number of opposition groups gathered and formed the National Liberation Movement, and their demand was for a federal government rather than the unitary government pursued by Nkrumah and the CPP. They had the support of prominent chiefs in the Ashanti region, which was one of the wealthiest in the Gold Coast. The National Liberation Movement was sponsored by the Ashanti chiefs to protect their power, wealth, and the influence of the region. This group even went to the extent of sending a petition to Queen Elizabeth II to ask for a royal commission into whatever government the Gold Coast would have. This group feared that when the British withdrew their protection, the other blacks in power would dominate and even suppress them. Clearly, the opposition was not satisfied with the plan for independence, so they demanded that instead of a unitary state, power should be devolved into regions. After elaborate discussions and debates, although Nkrumah did not compromise on his stand for a unitary state, the nation was divided into 5 regions, and the assembly voted for independence under the name that Nkrumah had earlier proposed, which was Ghana. Hence, the nation of Ghana was born. The Colonial Office announced that Independence Day will be 6th March 1957, and on the 6th March 1957, Ghana became the first British colony in sub-Saharan Africa to get independence, and Kwame Nkrumah was sworn in as Prime Minister. Ghana is now free. All eyes were now on this free African nation. Will it succeed? Is the black man capable of ruling himself after all? The world was waiting to know.
We live in a world of contradictions. These contradictions, however, keep the world going. Let me explain what I mean. Ghana is a small but very dynamic, independent African state. We are trying to reconstruct our economy and to build a new, free, and equal society. To do this, we must attain control of our own economic and political destinies. Only thus can we create higher living standards for our people and free them from the legacies and hazards of a colonial past and from the encroachments of neo-colonialism.
The Gold Coast colony was one of the most successful of the British colonies in Africa. Just before independence, it was one of the most developed of all the colonies, with schools, hospitals, social security, and railway connecting some of the most established towns in the colony. This was because the British needed it so that it could facilitate the lucrative business of cocoa and gold mining in the colony. But by 1957, when the country gained independence, cocoa production had gone down because of the disease which was called swollen shoot. Despite this economic setback, Ghana was still doing better than most British colonies in Africa. We can say that Nkrumah inherited a fairly good economy and he started up well. He began a campaign for rapid industrialization in Ghana in order to reduce Ghana's dependence on foreign goods. During his time, forestry, fishing, and cattle rearing expanded. Ghana's cocoa export doubled despite the effect of the disease, and the deposit of bauxite and gold were exploited effectively. At the time, Ghana had the highest per capita income in Africa. He began the construction of the Akosombo Dam in 1961 and completed it in 1965. The dam provided water for irrigation and hydroelectric power which produced enough electricity for towns and an aluminium plant. The electricity produced from this dam was even exported to nearby Togo and Benin. The dam's overflow created Lake Volta, the largest man-made lake and the second largest lake in the world. The Ghanaian government was forced to pay 50% of the cost of the project, but was allowed to contract only 20% of the electricity generated from the Akosombo Dam, and the remaining 80% was controlled by the Valco Group. Although the 20% electricity supply from the dam will serve 70% of the Ghanaian electricity needs, many rightly viewed this as an act of neocolonialism and criticized Nkrumah for this. For a strong advocate of imperialism and an outspoken Pan-Africanist, the criticism were justified. In 1960, Ghana became a republic and Kwame Nkrumah became its first president. He began pursuing his socialist policies and started developing ties with the Soviet Union and the People's Republic of China. And in 1962, he was awarded the Lenin Peace Prize by the Soviet Union. Nkrumah's socialist stand increased his difference with the opposition party, and he became the target of assassination attempts. 5 assassination attempts were made on his life, and all of them failed. One of those attempts was a police officer who fired straight at Nkrumah when he was leaving his residence for lunch. His bodyguard received all the 7 shots and died on the spot. The policeman was overpowered and eventually arrested. However, the most notable of this assassination attempt was the one involving a school pulpit. Nkrumah was returning from a official visit from Burkina Faso by road when his motorcar stopped in a town called Kulungugu in the upper eastern region of Ghana. A young school pupil was sent to deliver a bouquet of flowers to Nkrumah as a sign of reception. Unknown to both of them, a grenade was hidden in the bouquet, which the young girl was to deliver to the president. Before the girl delivered the flowers, the grenade exploded, dismantling her body and leaving fragments of her body all over Nkrumah. 3 suspects were arrested in connection to this murder and assassination attempt. The reason given for the arrest was that they were riding behind Kwame Nkrumah's vehicle. These suspects were tried and found not guilty. This verdict came as a surprise to Nkrumah, who believed that these men were the ones who tried to kill him. In a swift reaction, Nkrumah dismissed the chief judge, rushed the bill through the assembly that allowed him to set aside the judgment in the country's court. This allowed him to bring the suspect to trial again, and this time they were found guilty and sentenced to death, although the sentence was eventually commuted to life imprisonment. The National Assembly also passed the Preventive Detention Bill, which allowed him to detain anybody without trial. The Assembly also passed the bill that allowed him to announce the CPP as the only legal party in Ghana, with himself as president for life. The man that was enthusiastically called Osiagefo, which meant the Redeemer, soon lost his reverence and was now called a dictator. Everything has now become on Nkrumah. Bedema, who was now his finance minister, accused Nkrumah of financial recklessness. The 2 close allies were now separated by their differences. Nkrumah relieved Bedema of his duties as finance minister and appointed him as minister of health. Their growing differences and the accusation that Bedema was plotting a coup against Nkrumah left Bedema with no choice but to flee into exile. Nkrumah was increasingly becoming unpopular and losing the support of both the citizens and the country's army. On the 21st of February 1966, Kwame Nkrumah left for an official visit and a peace mission to Vietnam. Think about the irony. He left behind a country in turmoil to heal another man's country. While on his voyage to bring peace, a group of military officers and police personnel who called themselves the National Liberation Council, led by Joseph Otto Ankara, staged a violent coup that ousted Nkrumah as president and installed the National Liberation Council as its new government, and Joseph Otto Ankara as the head of government. This coup also enjoyed considerable support from the civil service. The Osiagefo turned dictator is no longer in power, and the people took to the streets in wild jubilation. Former president and revolutionary leader J.D. Rawlings recounted that he had never seen such explosion of joy when Nkrumah was overthrown. During his visit to Vietnam, he had gone for a quick stopover in China, and it was in Beijing that he heard the news of the coup. He stayed in Beijing for 4 days and went on to exile in Guinea. While in Guinea, President Sékou Touré gave him the honorary title of co-president, and he lived there until his death in 1972. Nkrumah is largely believed to have died of cancer of the throat, but Amilcar Cabral, at Nkrumah's burial, said that he had died of the cancer of betrayal. Some people, including his family members, believed that he might have died of poison. Nkrumah was no doubt a great force. But do you think his system of government will have led to the development of Ghana? Was he getting corrupt to power? Or was he on the track to becoming a benevolent dictator? Please let us know in the comment box. Thank you for watching this episode. Like, comment, and share with your friends. And until I see you again, bye bye.